Hi, everybody. I'm excited to dive into instructional strategy best practices with you today. We're looking at the fundamentals of building pathways for learning for your students. So let's get into it. First, it cannot be overstated how important it is to have objectives and outcomes on a daily basis, both within your own lesson and over the course of an entire unit or even the entire year. If you don't know what you're shooting for, it is unlikely that students are going to get there. So let's get to it. Designing learning outcomes is an important criteria for designing learning. We need to know what we're shooting for. We need to know our target. It brings clarity of purpose to our courses, right? So we know what we're going for, what we're shooting for. And in the end, we can assess our students there, right? It also helps us align all of our activities and assessments to the objectives. I don't know if you've ever been in a class where you get to a test or an exam, you're like, I didn't know that this was important. I didn't study this piece. Well, if you've clearly communicated learning objectives and outcomes to your students, then they actually do know what's important and can focus on those things in the class, and you're assessing them based on those learning outcomes and objectives. Great objectives or outcomes do a couple of things. First, they're observable and measurable. So I can identify, I'm asking students to actively do something. So it's not they just know something, right? What can they actually do with that knowledge? That's what we're looking for with a great objective. It demonstrates a range on Bloom's taxonomy where we're moving up to those higher order thinking skills as we go, and it helps inform and organize our instruction. So when I identify what my outcome is, then I design my instruction to follow and make sure that students are getting there, have the opportunity to get there. And then it demonstrates instructional hierarchy. It tells us what's important. I don't know if you've been ever built slides, for example, for a course where you're just like, it's overwhelming the amount of content that there is. I know I ran into that when I was teaching history for the first time. Like, how do I decide what to include and what not to include? Well, identifying what your learning outcomes are and what the big important takeaways are is key to making sure that you can focus on what is important. And then that hierarchy is also communicated to the students. They can identify what is important, which helps them organize their learning accordingly and get the takeaways that you're really looking for, that depth of learning that we're all seeking. It is also possible to have through line goals. In fact, it's a best practice. Can you identify the goals for your entire course, the big things that you want students to understand about all of the content that you cover? And of course, here at CVCA, we follow Ohio content standards where it applies. And we also have developed curriculum maps that look at this, that develop those outcomes over the course of an entire semester or year. So looking at those, planning your instruction around those, or refining those, depending on what you want to do moving forward, is an important practice. Okay, this is probably review to most of you, but I find it convicting. Every time I look at Bloom's taxonomy, I go through the self-assessment process where I'm like, am I actually moving students up on the higher order of thinking? Or am I spending most of my time down at the bottom with knowledge and comprehension? So I think something that people often forget is this is a pyramid where things build upon each other. So think of this as building your knowledge base on content, right? So at the very bottom, you have knowledge, which is recalling information. That's where you're defining terms, memorizing facts. It's an important part of learning to make sure that you're sharing the same language, right? And you're using the same facts. Then you move to comprehension, which is you know what the messages mean. And you can build off of that knowledge to comprehend additional depth. Then you get to application, which is where you're applying what you have learned to new problems or new scenarios that haven't necessarily been modeled for you. And then you get to analysis, where you're breaking down knowledge and activities into organizing into categories. So then you can create some sort of analysis of it, where I can try to identify the best pathway to solve a problem, for example. Then synthesis takes all of the learning and puts it together to develop something new, right? That's key. You have an outcome here. So you're developing a new solution or a new way to think about something. And then finally, you have evaluation, which is where you're looking at somebody else's information or newness or creation, and you're critiquing it based on your knowledge. So moving along that pyramid is key to growing the depth of knowledge for students and identifying for each learning outcome, where do I want them to land? Is this somewhere where I want them to be at evaluation level? We probably, if that is a course long goal, for example. But if you're really just need to get these equations under their belt, for example, in a math class, it might be okay to get to just comprehension or application level in your class. You don't necessarily need to get to analysis, but continually wrestling with what is the best level on Bloom's taxonomy for this particular outcome, I think is a really useful tension to manage as a teacher. If you're building it, this is just a process that you can use. First, define the object. What is it that you are instructing? So you have two examples here. And then determining the mastery level. So that's that Bloom's taxonomy we were talking about, right? One of them is just I'm looking for application, and the other one is I'm looking for critique. So we're up there at the very, very tippity top. So two different mastery levels. Then again, notice the action in the learning objective. Students will be able to apply fundamental principles of physics to real world situations. Applying that, so that's measurable, that's observable. Second, down there at the second example, students will be able to critique primary source material from the 18th century. That is active, it's observable. And notice how it sort of predetermines some activities that you might use to help students get to that level. And then you have your final ones here where they're kind of tweaked and redefined to be a little closer to what you're actually going to be doing in the classroom. Now, many of those objectives are already set for you through Ohio Content Standards or through the curriculum maps. But as you're building out your courses and you're building your curriculum, it is key to make sure you identify what you're trying to do, what the object is, what the mastery level is, and then connecting it to that learning objective so that students know what it is that they should be learning. Okay, part two.